Hi, welcome to this guide where I'll discuss the culture that is not necessarily the best in the ancient era, but that gets you through the ancient era with enough of an advantage so that you have still got an easy time in the classical era, and then basically you'll be able to power all the way through the game and win easily against the AI on the humankind difficulty. So this doesn't apply to other difficulties where there's a lot more leeway in terms of how you can play, what's strong, what's not strong. But on the humankind difficulty, well, that's what we'll focus on in this guide. To give you like a bit of sort of background on how much experience I have with the game, what I've been doing. So I've won the game on the humankind difficulty once. And I've played through the ancient era a number of times over the last few streams, and you can watch that. It's all on YouTube in sort of past streams, where you can see some of the experiences and learnings that we've had trying out a whole range of cultures to figure out which one is the easiest to get you through the ancient era. So what I'll sort of break this, and this guide will take a little bit of time to actually get through because there's a lot to explain to actually make this a good guide and to pass on the information. So what I'll first do is I'll discuss some of the nuances within the humankind difficulty, because there are actually ways that you can set up the game to make it more or less difficult on the humankind difficulty. And there's also a bit of an understanding of how the AI is strong and how it's weak, that you need to have, that I want to just explain so that you understand why some of these cultures are good or not good. And then we'll discuss sort of two scenarios or ways of setting up the game and which cultures are strong in either of those scenarios. And we'll consider every single culture that is available in the ancient era, some with a lot of detail, others with not a lot of detail. So yeah, let's start with just thinking or talking a little bit about the humankind difficulty, right? So that's the hardest difficulty in the game. Now, if you understand sort of the basic mechanics of the game, and you can click around on my channel, I'll try and link some of the basic sort of game mechanic guides in the description. In the long run, you're going to win against the AI, right? So it's a matter of getting through the ancient and the classical era. You still need a bit of an advantage in those two eras, and then you'll have no problems winning against the AI, right? Your human brain is so much better at figuring out and taking advantage of the various mechanics that are available compared to the AI that, has to be sort of programmed in advance by someone who has to take into account and all of the things that could happen in the game, whereas you can just sort of react to things that happen over time and optimize the strategy based on feedback that you're getting from the game, which the AI has a much harder time to do. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the game setups and how they play into the difficulty. Basically, the hardest way to play Humankind is on a Pangea map where everyone is on the same landmass, and where you have 80% or 90% landmass. And the reason for that will become apparent, but it's related to the time it takes for you to get your units to the AI empires, which is why the higher land masses are a problem, because you meet the AI empires later and they're further away from your city. And the Pangea map, assuming that you have all the possible competitors or all the recommended competitors in the game, means that you have to deal with every single AI in the game from the ancient era onwards, right? Some of them are a little bit further away, but you'll have at least sort of 3 or 4 neighbors where one of them is going to get at least somewhat lucky and maybe pick a war civ or a war culture and attack you, right? the easiest way to play the game on Humankind is to give every competitor their own continent, because basically you don't have to deal with the AI in the ancient era, you don't have to deal with them in the classical era, and even in later eras they don't do very much, because they have to get their units across the ocean, which is difficult to do in this game because of how long it takes to get any technology going, plus they'll have to land units on your front, and then they're really far away, and it'll be hard to reinforce. Basically, the AI is strongest towards the end of the ancient era and into the classical era, and then your abilities and the way that you can play the game makes it very easy to just outpace the AI with your economy. Right, so 2 ways that you can set up, 2 sort of broad ways of setting up the game. One is Pangea, which is a little bit harder, and then continents, which makes the game a little bit easier because you don't have to deal with the enemies. So we'll discuss sort of the scenario where you've either picked some continents with at least sort of 2 or 3 competitors on the same continent, and also the Pangea map, where you have placed the recommended number of competitors and sort of around the 60% landmass, which makes it reasonable to get to the AI in the early game. So and then the second scenario will be where you've essentially picked a continent for yourself, where you don't have to deal with the AI. So let's first talk about the first scenario. That's sort of a good challenge, although not impossible to win. You're not going to win every game on the Humankind difficulty, by the way. Like, sometimes you just get unlucky. And you can reduce the number of times that you have to restart by when you make big mistakes or find some critical information to just reload from a few turns earlier and take a bit of advantage. And if you have been watching my streams, I certainly do that sometimes, because otherwise it would just be kind of boring to have to keep restarting and hoping that everything works out for me. Right, so let's start with the first scenario. So in this scenario, you pick sort of, let's say, the Pangea map type with the recommended number of players with sort of 60% landmass. So we're going to spend a lot of time in the encyclopedia here looking at the cultures. So I'll basically go through at a high level every single one of these cultures, and some of them we'll just dismiss straight away. For example, the Phoenicians, right, they have a special bireme, so forget about it, right? Like, which the special or advanced unit is the way that you will gain an advantage in the ancient era. Basically, you'll have to harass your neighbors enough to take 1 or 2 cities from them, even if they're still around. It's fine, but at least you get 1 or 2, 3 cities from them, and they don't get those early cities, right? So for that, you have to sort of meet your neighbors fairly early on, otherwise they get way too strong and forget about it, right? So we've already dismissed the Phoenicians because of the bireme, right? And on Humankind difficulty, you have to remember that the AI gets a 2 combat strength buff over you. So even if you have an army that matches exactly the AI, you're going to lose, because 2 combat strength is really big in this game. And as the aggressor, you have to have much more of an advantage over the other player than just an equal matched army, because the enemy can reinforce, they have defenses, they can pick their battles, right? You being offensive, you're under time pressure, the cities are where they are, your reinforcements take a long time to come to the front line and so on, right? So you have to have a much bigger advantage over the enemy to reliably be able to win. Okay, so Phoenicians are no-go. Now let's talk about some of these that have chariots. So the Zhao have a special chariot, Egyptians have a special chariot, and I thought one other one. I think these Hittites also have a special chariot here. Let's click on them. Yeah, okay, so this is a chariot as well. The problem with these chariots is that they basically take quite a bit of science, quite a bit of technology to unlock, right? If we get out of here and go to the technology screen, Now I'm aware that the camera overlaps on some of these technologies, which I'm sorry for, but I haven't been able to figure that one out, where to place the camera. It's just, wherever you place it, it's bad. But if you look at this wheel tech, right, it's sort of in the late ancient era, right? So you need a decent amount of science to even be able to get to this, right? It's 180 science. Plus you have to unlock domestication and so on, right? So you have to have a decent amount of science. Then you have to have the strategic resources. So a horse and a bronze or a copper is not unusual to require. All of them will require some combination of that, right? At least they require horses. So it's situational for you to actually have access to the strategic resources. Plus these chariots are actually expensive to build, right? So you only get these chariots towards the end of the ancient era, and that's when the AI is at their most powerful. So in the end of the ancient era, the AI is going to be much stronger than you, as well as in the early classical era. Is sort of this area here is where they are the strongest. And then there's some cultures that in the AI hands are even strong throughout the classical era, but that's a topic for another day. So that's why these chariots are just not good enough. I tried a number of times, and by the time that you get enough of these chariots close to your enemies, they have spears, or they have built fortifications, or they've even advanced into the classical area, and they've picked one of the cultures that has an advanced sort of spear unit here, and then it's done, right? Like your war's done, your units are dead basically, and you can't do anything. And you've spent your whole ancient era trying to fight the AI and got nothing for it, right? So it's a waste. Okay, so that's why any of the civs, any of the cultures that have a chariot are just not good enough in this game to win in the ancient era. Okay, so what does that leave? Well, the Babylonians are easy to discuss. So a spear unit here is, this is a good defense unit, especially if you're playing against maybe the Assyrians or something, right? And even the Huns, this spear unit is pretty good against. But as an offensive unit, it's not going to cut it, right? This is only just about, I think this is weaker than the AI warriors, so it's not going to work. So that's why the Babylonians, nothing against the culture in general, but for the ancient era on humankind difficulty, I don't think the Babylonians are quite good enough to reliably get. I'm sure it's possible if you played enough, if you tried enough times, but I don't think that it's reliably possible. Okay, so we haven't spoken about the Assyrians. We've dismissed Babylonians, Egyptians. We haven't spoken about the Rapans. We've dismissed the Hittites, the Mycenaeans. We can talk about in a minute. Now there are a couple of these cultures, the Nubians and the Olmecs, that have like a special archer unit. Again, this is more defensive. Sorry, I'll bring that up so you can see it. This is more of a defensive play. Archers need to be protected by melee units if you take them offensively. So you can't. Okay, they're a little bit better, but then it's mixed in with the basic units, which are weaker than the AI units. So it doesn't matter that your archers are a bit better. It's not going to work offensively. Okay, so then let's discuss the Mycenaeans and actually go to this page to demonstrate it. Actually, no, I want to talk about the Assyrians. Okay, the Assyrians are probably good on lower difficulties. Because you can like raid the enemy, harass them, and take some of their stuff from them, right? Like these Assyrian raiders are good if you are pillaging or ransacking, right? And you get a bit of gold for it, which is nice. But they have a number of weaknesses, and the biggest one here is unable to climb fortifications. You won't be able to take enemy cities as soon as they build palisades. you'll just be stuck outside and get whittled down by the archers or whatever, right? Sometimes you get lucky and the AI is stupid and attacks the units into you if they have combat defense. But if they have any sense, they don't attack out, and then you have no chance. The other problem with the Assyrians is spears. So any spear unit will be able to counter these Assyrian raiders, and it'll be done, right? You will lose. These are better than chariots compared to... because they require less technology, and they are not as much, they don't require as much industry, so it only costs 90 industry to build, but they're still on the weak side. And even if you get lucky, then you have spent your whole ancient era just on war, and you probably don't have very much infrastructure. You didn't get any bonuses on any of the, like, you didn't get bonus gold, bonus food, bonus industry, or anything like that, right? Like, you only got these Assyrian raiders that might have gotten you an enemy city, but you'll struggle with science because you will have no population. They'll all be tied up in your Assyrian raiders, and your cities won't be producing very much industry. So that's where the Assyrians just sort of fall over. I'm sure they're fun to use, right? And against human players, they're probably pretty good. But against the AI, which is kind of the topic of this guide, they're just not quite good enough. Now, and also they actually require strategic resource, right? So they're somewhat situational. If you don't find horses, then, well, too bad. The Mycenaeans. Now, these guys are probably the second strongest. And you can, with the Mycenaeans, actually take over enemy cities. It's possible. And these Cyclopean fortresses are pretty good. We managed, I think when I picked the Mycenaean, we managed to get out of the ancient era, but we had very bad science because we had to pump all of our population into this unit. The combat strength here is not that much more after the AI bonus. So if you pick the right civics, then you can get these to be stronger than the AI. But and these also take a while to get out. They require a technology to actually build, and they also have, I think, around 90 industry cost, 180 industry cost to actually build, right? So they're more expensive than the Assyrian raiders. Now, the kind of saving grace for the Mycenaeans is that they actually have a somewhat of a sort of industry boost through their Cyclopean fortresses, right? Because they count as makers' quarters. And you can place them wherever you want, which means that it's essentially second outposts, so you can put them down on like a bunch of forest or into a stone field or next to mountains and get a nice industry boost. So this actually gives you a little bit of economy. So that's why the Mycenaeans are close. You have to get pretty lucky to survive to get through the ancient era, and you'll have really bad science as well because of all the population that you had to pump into these premature units. But it's possible. I usually find that I have an even bigger disadvantage in the classical era when I pick these, and basically you get taken out by the AI or taken over by the AI at that point. But for example, if you only have one competitor on your continent, I think the Mycenaeans are a way to actually get through that game and take out your nearest neighbor, cripple them enough that you can get through the game no problem, right? But if you have three competitors, it's less likely, and especially if you play on Pangea with sort of 6 competitors, I think the Mycenaeans are just not strong enough. Now, so then you might say, what? So only the Rappans are left? These guys that are like food focused are the culture that'll get you through the ancient era the best? Yes, they are. And there are lots of reasons for that, actually. The biggest reason for that is these runners, right? You get your army with the Harappans for free in the Neolithic era. You need to get a little bit lucky in the Neolithic era and get to sort of six at least, 6 scouts or 6 tribe units. 7 or 8 makes enemies like a pushover, right? And the reason these are so good is because the AI tends to have scouts running around on their own or in twos, right? And if you group up a unit of 4 of these, you can take out like 3 of those parties. Like take on one of scout 3 times, for example. And that's a way to build your war support. That's a way to damage their economy because they won't be able to claim territory. And then usually you find the enemy players just around the time that they actually advance to the ancient era. So their cities will have 0 or 1 population, and at that point you can just walk these runners into the city and get it in the same turn without a fight. And then you get a whole city for free, which costs like a huge amount of influence to get, right? And that city is going to be quite far away from your home territory, right? Which is also really hard to get without attacking anyone, right? And you've taken a city away from your nearest neighbors, so you've crippled them in a big way. Like their first city is gone, you got it from them, right? And then not only does all of that happen, but you get this +1 food on tile producing food and +1 food on a river, which is amazing. This basically means that you have populations of around 8 or 10 in most of your cities without focusing on food. So you can get that population to focus on science, on research, which powers you through the ancient era like nobody's business, right? You'll be the first one that gets to pick a classical era with the Harappans. Now, the classical era is still not like easy to get through, depending on, like for example, if they pick the Huns, like if the AI picks the Huns, you don't have a good way of defeating the Huns, because you don't have a very good defensive unit, right? And spears aren't that good, like base spears are not that good against the Huns. But yeah, the Harappans are just really powerful because they make your free army that you get in scouts essentially on par with the enemy. And then if you pick the right civics, you can even be a little bit stronger than them. Plus, you actually get the most important thing, or you get a lot of population in the era where it matters the most. Population doesn't matter in the later eras because your quarters base production is all you need to get your basic yields, right? But early on, you can't build very many quarters because of stability and all the other issues, right? But population is a way for you to get plenty of science, plenty of industry, plenty of money if you need it. Plus, these units are free. That's the other disadvantage of the mycenaeans that I didn't talk about, is that the unit actually costs upkeep. So you're going to be broke, basically. With the Harappans, you'll have plenty of money. So yeah, that's why I think the Harappans are the strongest civ to get you through the ancient era, the most reliably on the Humankind difficulty. So yeah, now let's talk about the other scenario where you basically don't have to deal with neighbors, right? Because of the way that you've set up the world. And you can achieve that either by having a really big map and having maybe half the recommended number of competitors on the map, like the area will be really far away. You'll get through the ancient and classical era without probably even meeting them. And you can sort of start ramping up your economy, get a few military units going, and by the time the AIs find you, you will have already outplayed them, out-economized them in a big way, right? What are the best cultures for that kind of playstyle? Well, I think there are 3 cultures that are possible here. The Harappans are still very strong because of the population that you actually get from them. And in the early game, the population is the way that you get your FIMS, like your food, industry, money, and science, right? because you won't have very many quarters and you'll struggle with stability and all that sort of stuff, right? Now the Egyptians are also really good because they get you this nice industry bonus. I don't think the Egyptians are quite as good as the Harappans, because you'll struggle a little bit with science. You're still going to struggle with stability. You're not going to be able to build all these Egyptian periods everywhere because of stability. So I think the Harappans are just a little bit better than the Egyptians, even for an economy play. And then the other contender is actually the Zhao. The Zhao is really good. Really good. The reason is twofold, right? Like, people like the Confucian school because it gives you a good amount of science, right? And then you can get your population focused on like industry or whatever you want, right? So the Confucian school is pretty good. It gives you a lot of stability, so you can actually build a lot of the quarters that, to start capturing a lot of the yields on the map. But this harmonious thought is actually really strong, and it stays strong throughout the entire game because of the +2 stability on district. This is like a 200 stability bonus for like 100 district, which is still really, really strong in the late game. Like, there is a culture, one of the cultures, I think, in the industrial era. We can look at the cultures that I'm talking about. Industrial. The Austro-Hungarians. They have this open house, which is +2 stability, +1 stability per district, and +2 stability per adjacent district. This doesn't really matter. In a city with 2 territories, this open house is on par with just the 3 bonus that the Zhao get, right? Because you get +2 stability per district with the Zhao for free. You don't even have to build anything or take up a tile, right? A valuable tile. But I mean, if you have a city with like 4 or 5 territories, then the open house is much better than the base bonus. But imagine the Zhao combined with this. You can basically get to a point, if you have 5 territories and you put 5 of these open house down, then in that city, districts are free. You don't have to worry about stability. You can build as many districts as you want in that city, right? That's why the Zhao are really good. They get you a good amount of science, and you won't have to worry about stability anywhere near as much as with all the other cultures. So if you don't have to worry about fighting the AI, like there are no neighbors, then the Egyptians are really good because of their industry bonuses. The Rappans are still really strong because of their ability to grow population, and the Zhao are really good because of their stability as well as their science. I actually probably think the stability bonus is better compared to the science bonus that the Zhao get. But yeah, I told you that this would take a while to actually explain. So sort of in summary, if you have to worry about neighbors, the Harappans aren't a guarantee win, but they're pretty much, I think, the strongest culture to actually reliably get you through the ancient era and the classical era on the Humankind difficulty. And if you don't have to worry about neighbors, you can pick basically anything in the game, really. But the Rappans, Egyptians, and the Zhao are really good, as discussed. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.